I never expected to stop my truck on a lonely forest road that morning, but something on the shoulder made me slam the brakes so hard my seatbelt dug into my chest. The mist still clung to the trees, and the drizzle turned the asphalt slick. At first, in that gray light, I thought it was a stray dog crouched by the weeds. But when I stepped closer, every muscle in my body locked. It was a bear cub, no bigger than a house cat, sitting in the wet grass and shaking like it had been out there all night. Its fur was matted with moisture and dirt, its ribs faintly visible. The tiny head lifted, and two wide, bewildered eyes fixed on me. The little thing tried to stand. Its back legs wobbled, and it collapsed again with a faint cry that seemed far too fragile for a creature of the wild. The forest around me felt unnaturally still, broken only by the dripping of rain from pine branches and the occasional hollow call of a crow. My first thought was sharp and immediate. Where's the mother? Bears don't abandon their cubs unless something is terribly wrong. I scanned the roadside, my nerves raw, my hands half raised as if that tiny life might bolt at any sudden motion. I crouched low, palms open, whispering under my breath without thinking, hoping my quiet tone might somehow reassure the cub even though I knew it couldn't understand. The cub swayed, sides heaving, exhaustion written in every trembling movement. My heart pounded so violently that I felt it in my throat, caught between an almost overwhelming urge to scoop it up and the stern reminder in my mind that getting too close could be a death sentence if the mother appeared. I forced myself to breathe evenly, whispering again, "Stay calm, don't rush." With stiff fingers, I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the local ranger station. The line clicked and rang, the sound far too loud in the hush of the woods. As it rang, I froze at a sudden sound in the undergrowth, a rustle heavy enough to crush twigs, not just the sigh of wind. My eyes darted toward the trees, and slowly a shape took form in the shadows. Broad shoulders, a thick neck, movement uneven. My lungs seized as realization struck. The mother was there. She stepped just enough into the open for me to see her clearly. One front paw barely touched the ground, her weight shifting in an awkward rhythm. Her coat was dark, patchy in spots where it looked scraped or muddy. She lowered her massive head, ears twitching at every drip and echo. Then came the sound, a guttural grunt, deep and raw, vibrating through the air and into my chest. It was not a roar but a warning, a voice of pain and fury that made my instincts scream to run. I stood frozen, the phone pressed to my ear, whispering to the dispatcher as fast as I could, telling them I had a cub here. The mother was injured, and both were dangerously close. The cub cried again, a thin, desperate sound, and the mother answered with a low growl that carried heartbreak more than anger. She shifted, half in the shadows, half in the open, her body torn between the agony of her injury and the instinct to protect her offspring. My truck's hazard lights blinked rhythmically behind me, throwing red pulses onto the wet road and the trees, turning the moment surreal. For a long breath, I felt suspended, trapped between the relative safety of my truck and the raw presence of a wounded bear. Every muscle in me was coiled tight. The dispatcher's voice cut through the storm of panic. Calm, steady, almost soothing. Stay in the truck if possible. Do not move closer. Rangers are on the way. I swallowed, nodded to myself though she couldn't see me, and began to back up slowly, one step at a time, eyes never leaving the tree line. The cub had collapsed again, its sides heaving, tiny chest rising too fast. My stomach twisted painfully. Time was running out. Every second felt stolen. From inside the truck, behind a thin pane of glass, the world looked like a grim standoff carved in stillness. The cub whimpered, a soft plea barely audible, while the mother responded with a groan that sounded torn from her very core. My hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. I whispered to myself again and again, "Hold on. Help is coming. Just hold on." Minutes stretched, bending time until it felt like hours. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the trembling body by the road and the wounded shadow weaving through the forest edge. When headlights finally cut through the mist from behind me, the relief that rushed through me was so sharp it almost hurt. The ranger vehicle rolled closer, beams sweeping across the dripping trees and the lifeless-looking cub. I scrambled to wave them down, pointing frantically, my throat tight with urgency. The engine of my truck idled rough and loud. as though the machine itself felt the strain of waiting. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me. The cub still clung to life, though faintly, each breath shallow. The mother lingered, hidden among the dark pines, her pain clear in every faltering step. Even with help arriving, I knew this was not an ending. It was the beginning of something much more complicated, and I had no idea whether we were about to save a life or watch nature break our hearts in real time. The rangers moved with a precision that came from long practice. 2 trucks pulled up behind mine, headlights dimmed, radios murmuring. Maya, the lead ranger, approached first, her hand raised in a signal for me to stay put. She was calm but fast, her voice quiet as she coordinated her team. One ranger set up a tranquilizer rifle, another prepared a large transport crate lined with straw. The air was thick with rain and tension. I pointed toward the trees where I had last seen the mother. Maya's eyes followed, narrowing when a low growl rolled out of the shadows. The cub lifted its head weakly, let out another cry, and dropped it again onto the wet grass. The mother answered, her heavy body swaying forward into the faint glow of the headlights. Even from the truck, I could see her front paw dragging awkwardly, blood darkening the fur around her leg. "Wait for the shot," Maya whispered into her radio. The ranger with the rifle knelt steady, tracking the bear's slow advance. My pulse raced as the bear grunted, torn between retreating and lunging. When the dart fired, the sound was barely louder than the rain. It struck her in the shoulder, and she bellowed in pain, staggering back into the trees. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as the seconds stretched unbearably. Then she swayed, groaned, and collapsed with a heavy thud that shook the ground even from where I sat. Maya signaled the all clear. I exhaled so hard my chest ached. The team rushed forward, nets and gloves ready, approaching the cub first. It tried to squirm but was too weak, its cries pitiful but sharp. One ranger scooped it carefully into a thick blanket, holding it against his chest as though it were fragile glass. Another checked the mother, kneeling by her massive frame, touching her muzzle lightly. "She's breathing," he said. "Strong, but injured." They brought the cub toward the crate, and I stepped out of my truck, moving closer under Maya's watchful eye. "Stay behind me," she said firmly. The cub blinked up at me as it was placed gently inside, the straw crinkling beneath its tiny weight. It whimpered once more, and my stomach turned at the thought of how close it had come to being left alone forever on that roadside. Together, the rangers used a winch and ropes to lift the mother into a second transport cage. The effort took all their strength, the wet ground making every step slippery. Her paw dragged unnaturally, and even sedated, she groaned when moved. The sound was deep, mournful, and it cut straight through me. Once inside the truck, both animals were secured, blankets draped over the cages to keep them calm. Maya turned to me, rain dripping off her hat brim. "You did the right thing calling us when you did," she said. She wouldn't have lasted long like this. Her words didn't feel like relief, more like a warning of what might still come. I followed their convoy down the winding forest road, my headlights bouncing across the slick pavement. The night felt heavier than before, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. At the veterinary center, bright floodlights cut through the gloom. The cages were unloaded quickly, staff rushing to examine both animals. The cub was weighed, measured, and placed under warming lamps. A vet inserted a small tube to help with hydration, his voice steady as he explained the process. The little bear's eyes fluttered, but it didn't resist. Meanwhile, another team focused on the mother. They cleaned her leg, and even from several feet away, I could see the ugly wound just above the paw. The flesh was torn and swollen, fur clumped with dried blood. "Looks like she was hit by a vehicle," Dr. Reed, the head veterinarian, muttered grimly. "This didn't happen today. She's been struggling like this for days." He shook his head, already preparing instruments. I stood in the corner, hands shoved in my pockets, watching the professionals work. My heart was split in two, relief that the cub was safe for now, and dread at the sight of its mother lying motionless on the table. The smell of antiseptic filled the room, mixing with the damp scent of fur. Machines beeped steadily, and voices rose and fell in hurried instructions. When Maya stepped beside me, her face was unreadable. "We'll do everything we can," she said. "But you should prepare yourself. This is a serious injury." I nodded slowly, eyes locked on the bear's labored breathing. Nothing about this felt like victory. It felt like the fragile beginning of a fight we weren't sure we could win. The hours after the surgery dragged on like days, each tick of the clock grinding against my nerves. I sat on a hard wooden bench in the hallway outside the treatment room, shifting occasionally but never able to get comfortable. The smell of disinfectant hung thick in the air, mixing with the faint metallic tang of blood that seemed to seep from under the door. Through the glass window, I could see Dr. Reed and his team moving constantly around the bear's massive frame, their bodies casting sharp shadows under the fluorescent lights. Their voices were muffled but urgent, clipped commands and tired replies. Tubes ran from her body to humming machines, a web of fragile lifelines. Every so often one of them would bend close, stethoscope pressed against her chest, their brows furrowed, eyes betraying worry they tried to hide. The cub lay in a smaller enclosure nearby, wrapped in a blanket beneath the glow of a heating lamp. Its nose twitched, its tiny paws occasionally pawing at the air as though reaching for something just beyond its grasp. Every so often it let out a soft, confused cry, high-pitched and aching, a sound that pierced me deeper than I could admit. Each whimper twisted my stomach tighter, reminding me of the fragility of everything I was watching. Maya stood near me, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her expression locked into something between resolve and sorrow. She didn't speak much, but her steady presence was the only thing keeping me from unraveling completely. Her eyes stayed on the window, scanning every movement inside, as if sheer willpower could tilt the outcome. Hours crawled past before Dr. Reed finally emerged, peeling off his gloves with hands that trembled from fatigue. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, his jaw clenched as he spoke quietly. We stopped the bleeding, cleaned the wound, stabilized her as best we could, but she's lost too much blood, he said. We'll monitor her, but the unfinished sentence hung in the air heavier than anything else he might have said. I didn't need the rest. His tone said everything. Night settled in, though the bright lights of the clinic never dimmed. The staff worked in relentless shifts, checking vitals, adjusting drips, changing bandages, whispering instructions in low, urgent tones. I barely moved from the hallway, only stepping away to splash water on my face once or twice. The cub stirred and whimpered again, pressing its nose against the side of its enclosure as though searching blindly for warmth that was no longer there. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, whispering words that carried no meaning to it, but helped me hold myself together. Inside, the bear's chest rose and fell in a slow, shallow rhythm, each breath like a fragile thread threatening to snap at any moment. By the time the first hint of gray filtered through the clinic's windows, I knew. The tension in the staff's movements shifted, their voices softened, and when Dr. Reed finally walked out again, his pace was slower, his shoulders bowed. His hands hung heavy at his sides, as if even lifting them required effort. Maya looked up instantly, and his silence told us more than the words that finally came. She's gone, he said quietly. His voice cracked, just slightly, before he steadied it again. She fought hard, but her body couldn't recover. The hallway seemed to close in around me. My knees went weak, and I sank back onto the bench, the wood biting into me without mercy. Through the glass, the mother bear lay motionless now, a blanket draped respectfully over her body. The machines had been switched off, leaving behind only a heavy, suffocating silence. My eyes drifted to the cub's enclosure, and for a moment I convinced myself it could feel the loss. The little creature shifted restlessly, its whimper sharper this time, echoing in the quiet space like an accusation we couldn't answer. Maya exhaled slowly, her jaw clenched tight. We'll need to decide what happens next, she said. Her voice was calm but frayed at the edges. Dr. Reed nodded grimly, rubbing at the back of his neck. The cub is young, but with the right care, it has a chance. The problem is, who's going to provide that care? Raising a bear in captivity isn't simple. Too much human interaction, and we ruin its chances of ever surviving in the wild. Too little, and it won't make it through the first month. I looked between them, unsure if I should even speak. My chest ached with the weight of the choice hovering in the air. What's the alternative? I finally asked. Reed sighed heavily, as though the question carried the weight of every similar case he'd ever faced. There are larger centers with more resources, he said, but they're hours away. Transport could stress it beyond recovery. Right now, It needs round-the-clock care, feeding every few hours, constant monitoring. Someone has to be here, dedicated, no matter what. The cub pawed weakly at the blanket, curling into itself, its body trembling with effort. The image of finding it alone on the roadside burned vividly in my mind. The desperate cries, the helpless stumbling, the shadow of its mother fighting to reach it. Now that shadow was gone. Maya placed a firm hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "This is going to be a difficult road," she said. "We need to decide quickly. Every hour matters." Inside the treatment room, staff moved quietly, preparing to cover the mother's body completely, their gestures slow and respectful. The sight pressed into me like a weight I couldn't shake. I had witnessed rescues before, but never something that cut so deep. One life had ended, another now dangled precariously, and the responsibility for its survival fell squarely into human hands. The cub's faint cry echoed again, sharper this time, and the entire hallway seemed to pause in unspoken agreement. The decision wasn't theoretical anymore. It was immediate, pressing, and it demanded an answer we weren't sure any of us were ready to give. The first night after the loss felt impossibly long. The clinic was quieter now, but the emptiness carried its own weight. The cub stirred constantly in its enclosure, pawing weakly at the blanket, calling out in small, broken cries that sounded too much like grief. Staff rotated in and out, but it was Maya who stayed longest, pulling a chair up beside the enclosure and sitting there through the hours, her presence steady and unyielding. I watched from the doorway, struck by her patience. She spoke softly, words I couldn't make out, her hand resting against the glass of the cub's box as if her calm could reach it. By the second day, the plan was clear. Maya volunteered to take on primary responsibility for the cub's care. Dr. Reed approved, noting she had the steadiness and discipline for it. They couldn't allow everyone to handle the animal. Too many hands, too many scents, too much confusion would only hurt its chances of survival. One person needed to be its anchor. Maya accepted without hesitation. I saw something flicker in her eyes then, not just duty, but a kind of fierce determination. She refused to let this cub fade away. The feeding schedule began that same evening. A warmed formula bottle was prepared, the mixture measured carefully. Maya wrapped the cub in a soft cloth, holding it firmly but gently. At first the cub resisted, squirming and whining, its tiny jaws snapping instinctively. But hunger won out. It latched onto the nipple of the bottle, sucking greedily, milk dribbling down its chin. The sound of its swallowing filled the room, rhythmic and desperate, and for the first time since the night on the road, I felt hope stir in my chest. Maya smiled faintly, whispering encouragement as though speaking to a child. The days blurred into a pattern of care. Feedings every 3 hours, cleaning the enclosure, checking weight and temperature. Maya barely left its side. She dozed in the chair, waking at the cub's smallest movement. When it whimpered, she was there. When it kicked, she adjusted the blanket. When it slept, she sat in silence, her eyes steady, protective. I tried to help where I could, fetching supplies, carrying notes to Dr. Reed, even just bringing Maya coffee when her exhaustion began to show. But the bond forming between her and the cub was undeniable. It was more than routine, it was connection. By the end of the week, the cub's body showed change. Its ribs were less visible, its movements less shaky. When Maya placed it on the blanket on the floor for short, supervised moments, it began to crawl, exploring clumsily, its nose twitching at new smells. It pawed at Maya's boots, then rolled onto its back, wriggling as though testing muscles it hadn't used before. Maya laughed quietly, the sound surprising even her. "You're tougher than you look," she said, watching the cub tumble forward again. Night after night, the clinic became a different kind of place. The beeping of machines grew less urgent, replaced by the soft noises of a growing animal. Sometimes I'd walk past the room and see Maya asleep in the chair, the cub curled nearby in its blanket, both breathing in sync. Other times she was awake, bottle in hand, eyes half closed but steady, humming under her breath as the cub nursed. These small moments carried weight, proof that life could push forward even after loss. Dr. Reed tracked the progress closely. Each new ounce gained, each sign of strength was noted, charted carefully. He was cautious, reminding us not to become complacent. Wild animals were unpredictable, survival never guaranteed. But even he admitted the cub was responding better than expected. "If it keeps this up, we'll have a fighter on our hands," he said one afternoon, tapping the chart with a faint smile. 2 weeks in, the difference was undeniable. The cub was sturdier, more alert. It sniffed at the corners of the room, pawed at objects, tested its growing strength with playful swipes. It still cried out sometimes, sharp little calls that echoed its early loneliness, but those cries came less often now. More often it moved with curiosity, nudging at Maya's legs or tugging at the hem of her jacket. She never discouraged it, but she kept her boundary, careful not to treat it as a pet. Her voice stayed calm, her hands steady, always mindful of the line between care and imprinting. I found myself drawn back to the clinic more often, unable to stay away. Watching the cub grow stronger was like watching a fragile flame catch and spread, fragile but bright. Maya's commitment was unwavering, and it showed in the cub's progress. Where there had been despair, now there was the slow, careful emergence of hope. And with every new sign of life, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this small bear had a chance after all. The months that followed carried a rhythm I never expected to witness. What had begun as desperate nights in the clinic slowly transformed into steady progress, one milestone after another. Each time I returned, the cub was stronger, bolder, more alive. It no longer whimpered endlessly in search of what it had lost. Instead, it pushed forward, claiming the space it had been given with restless energy. By the 3rd month, the small bundle of trembling fur I had first seen by the roadside had grown into a sturdy young bear with bright eyes and sure steps. Maya remained at its side through every stage, shaping her days and nights around its care. She introduced it to natural scents, branches, soil, berries collected from the forest, so it would not forget the world it came from. The cub reacted with curiosity, pawing, sniffing, even rolling in the dirt to coat itself in smells that belonged to the wild. The change was visible. Where once it had clung to survival, now it embraced growth. When I finally found the time to visit again, the difference stunned me. The cub was kept in a larger outdoor enclosure by then, surrounded by trees and logs, places to climb and dig. As soon as I approached the fence, I saw it move toward me, not with fear, but with the confident gait of a creature discovering its strength. Its fur was thick, glistening under the late afternoon sun. It rose on its hind legs, sniffing the air, then dropped back down to paw at the earth, as if to show off the power it had found in its body. Maya joined me at the fence, her face tired but proud. "Look at her," she said softly. "She's not the same cub you first saw." I nodded, watching the young bear swipe at a log and then chase a drifting leaf across the ground. "You gave her that chance," I said. Maya shook her head. "We all did. Even you, the night you stopped on that road. If you had kept driving," she let the thought trail off, and we both stood silently, letting the unspoken truth hang there. Dr. Reed came out from the clinic with his clipboard, nodding toward the enclosure. "Weight is steady, appetite strong. She's responding exactly how we hoped." He flipped through his notes, his tone cautious but approving. "We'll keep her here a while longer, let her grow. Eventually, there's a chance we can prepare her for release. It won't be soon, but the possibility is there." Hearing those words, I felt something loosen in my chest, tension I hadn't realized I was still holding. Release. The word was heavy with meaning. It didn't erase what had happened, but it promised something more than survival. It offered the idea of freedom. The cub ambled closer to the fence again, lowering its head to sniff near where I stood. For a brief moment, its eyes met mine, and in that look I saw both the fragility of what it had endured and the resilience that carried it here. I remembered the trembling cries on the roadside, the shadow of its injured mother, the desperate hours in the clinic. Now, standing strong, it was proof that loss didn't always end in despair. Sometimes it opened the door to something new. As the sun dipped lower, casting long beams of gold through the trees, I felt the forest breathe again around us. Maya leaned against the fence, arms crossed, eyes never leaving the cub. "Life doesn't stop," she said quietly. "Not for us, not for them. It just changes shape." Her words sank deep, and I knew she was right. The mother's absence would never vanish, but her cub carried forward, alive and thriving, a living testament to her fight. I left the center that evening with the image of the young bear still bright in my mind. The sound of its paws on the earth, the sparkle in its eyes, the way it leaned into the scents of the forest, it all stayed with me. I knew I would carry this lesson for the rest of my life, that sometimes the smallest decision, like stopping on a rainy road, could ripple outward into something far greater. A single act of compassion had given this cub a future. As I drove away, the forest stretched endlessly on either side of the road, alive with the quiet rustle of unseen creatures. I thought of the mother, of her final struggle, and of the cub now standing tall in her place. The grief remained, but it was softened by the knowledge that her legacy endured. In the steady steps of her growing child, in the care of those who refused to give up, life found a way forward. And with that truth, I finally let myself breathe easy, knowing the story hadn't ended in loss, but in the promise of survival.